you want to make sure to keep your head down through the stroke. No matter what kind of putting stroke you're doing, a lot of people have a tendency to want to see where the ball is going, and they lift their head out last second, which will either pull the putter face closed or leave the putter face open, and they're missing putts and they're wondering why. If you watch almost every single PGA pro, watch them after the ball leaves the putter face. That head and those eyes stay down for an extra second while the ball is maybe rolled already 4 or 5 feet. So that, in my opinion, is like one of the most important things.
Hi, this is Phil Singer from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I play at Indian Hills Country Club. This is Golf Smarter number 890.
The emerging world of competitive putting with World Putting League sideline reporter Brock Gillespie.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome to the Golf Smarter podcast, Brock.
How you doing, Fred? Happy to be here.
Great to have you on, because I think this is going to be a topic that's going to tantalize a lot of people around the world who are fascinated by what's going on, talking about competitive putting. It seems like it's a whole new world that's starting up in competitive putting.
There's been a huge surge, Fred, and it's a very exciting time. I run the National Putting Tour. I do putting competitions mainly in the Southwest, but I'm starting to branch out into the East Coast. And then there are a number of other entities that are coming out that are really making a big push to popularize competitive putting. So it's a very exciting time for competitive putters.
And how did you get involved in this?
So I don't know if you heard of the Major Series of Putting. This came out in 2017. They were funded by a guy by the name of Guy Laliberté, who owns Cirque du Soleil. A lot of people don't know this, but French Canadians love putting. And Guy Laliberté, yeah.
That's pretty random.
Yeah. They're, in fact, about maybe 30, 35 years ago, there used to be a television show. I think they called it Putt-Putt, and it aired in French Canada, Quebec, mainly Quebec. And it was all the rage for a little while, like most TV shows that eventually went off the air. But the French Canadians love putting. And this guy, Guy Laliberté, and a guy by the name of Guillaume Belland, who now heads up PopStroke's putting tour, which is owned by Tiger Woods, they started this thing called the Major Series of Putting. And they did these nationwide putting contests in many USA cities and a little bit in Canada. They built a big, huge putting stadium behind Planet Hollywood. And to your viewers, they can go to Google and just search MSOP Putting Stadium and do an image search and see this phenomenal putting stadium that was built. It was just magnificent. And the putting stadium only lasted for 1 year. The MSOP, the Major Series of Putting, lasted 3 years. And unfortunately, they couldn't turn a profit and they went out of business. But that's how I first got into competitive putting. And I started doing these competitions. I live in San Diego. And I started doing these competitions, and I finished in the top 3 in San Diego 2 years in a row and made it to their finals and fell in love with competitive putting. And so that's how I got started with the Major Series of Putting. Now, there were entities doing putting competitions well before this. Some of your older viewers might remember the TV show that was on in the late 70s and early 80s. I believe it was on ABC, but it was on one of the major networks on Saturday morning. And they would play what are called the putt-putt courses, which are miniature golf courses that are flat, that have like these railings, these flat metal railings. And
you mean like bumper bowling? Bumpers for bowling?
Yeah, it's sort of like that. Not all the holes require bounces off walls, but a lot of them do. Okay. And so that was sort of the beginning of things. The TV show that was on in the late 70s and early 80s, that was sort of the beginning of this competitive putting landscape. And then there was nothing really those competitions still went on, but nothing was televised until the Major Series of Putting in 2017. Fox Sports picked it up and they did a TV show. Unfortunately, it went out of business because it's very tough to make money throwing competitive putting tournaments. So it went for 3 years, but what it did is it spawned all these other entities to kind of jump into the game. And so that's where I initially started as a player. And then I did the major series of putting. And then that kind of spawned what I run now, which is the National Putting Tour, as well as some of these other putting entities.
Unbelievable. Does having the long drive competition becoming so popular, does that help bring along this putting tour and all these various putting tours?
A lot of people have mentioned that. And yes, I do think that there's that helped a little bit. I think it's just one of those things where, and this is just like my own personal opinion, but the American public is always thirsting for something new.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have your major sports that have been around forever: National Football League, and the NFL, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, etc.
Don't forget the NBA.
NBA, of course.
We're going into playoffs.
Yeah, but the American public has a thirst for something new, and I think one of the things that kind of helped surge this thing was COVID. All the major sports they shut down for a while, right? The ESPN and some of these networks were starving for content. So they were putting on, a lot of people have seen cornhole on television now.
Right.
And there's a lot of other small time sports that were getting some run. And I think that the fact that the Americans are in search for something new, as well as COVID kind of bringing some of these fringe sports to the forefront, I think has kind of allowed this thing to flourish. And then also keep in mind, COVID made golf explode. And I remember before COVID, my local municipal that I used to go play, I could get on any time. Now I can't even get a tee time on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. So golf is
2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, 2 weeks in advance, exactly. Golf has experienced a boom, and people are really interested in golf-related things. And then the MSOP doing their thing from 2017 to 2019 kind of made some of these other entities realize that, there's something here with competitive putting. And so I think that all of those were factors, yeah.
Unbelievable. Now, we're not talking about miniature golf courses here. Are these like normal type of greens? How does this work?
Well, that's a great question, because there is not a norm right now. Okay. So the TV shows that I told you about years ago were done on what are called putt-putt courses. These are courses that are mostly flat, that have railings that you bounce it off of, or you just go straight at the hole, right? Then
don't forget the clown's mouth and the windmill and those kind of things.
No, I'm getting to that. So putt-putt courses putt-putt courses usually don't have those types of things on the course. Okay. But then there's what is called mini golf courses. Okay. Or mini putt. Okay. Mini golf is like what you see at the local family fun center, where you're hitting your ball through, past the windmill. Maybe there's a hole with like a volcano and you got to hit it into the top of the volcano. Or the one that people always joke about is maybe there's a hole with a clown's mouth at the end and you try to hit it into the clown's mouth. Or stuff that is really outside the box, crazy, wild kind of stuff. Maybe even some of the stuff that you would see on the TV show Holy Moly, where you got all these wild things going on. That's considered mini golf. And there is what's called the U.S. Pro Mini Golf Association, which is headed by a guy by the name of Bob Detweiler, who's an absolute legend in the field. And they still do putting competitions in mini golf. Then with the MSOP, it brought to the forefront what I term is just putting courses, okay? These are not putt-putt courses where you're bouncing it off the walls. These are not mini golf courses where you're hitting it in the clown's mouth. These are just higher-end putting courses that are built to represent more of putts that you would see on the golf course. The holes mimic putts that you would see on the golf course. And there are companies like the Nicklaus Group, the Nicklaus putting entity. They build these putting courses, and they actually built the putting course that was at the putting stadium in 2017. Jack Nicklaus has an entity that does that. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen commercials for companies like Back Nine Greens. And there's also a company called Putt Tech that's putting in these really cool putting courses that resemble more of putts that you see on the regular golf course. And even a step further, Putt Tech is building these incredible putting courses that actually look like golf courses. So if you were to see an aerial shot of this course, you might think it's a regular golf course, but it's all turf. And these courses have sand traps, they have water hazards, but there's no real sand and no real water. They're putting courses that look like golf courses. And one that has become incredibly popular, that's owned by Tiger Woods and a guy by the name of Greg Bartoli, is called Pop Stroke. And Pop Stroke has been doing some phenomenal things. TaylorMade just bought a 10% ownership stake in Pop Stroke. And Pop Stroke does this thing called the Pop Stroke Tour Series that is ran by a guy by the name of Guillaume Belland, who was one of the guys that started the major series of putting. And they're doing putting tournaments. You can actually see their website, which I designed, at popstroketourseries.com. And they're doing these professional putting contests. And the Pop Stroke stuff is absolutely phenomenal. So there's a lot of different types of courses and different entities throwing tournaments on these courses. Now, the National Putting Tour, which is what I run, I am not pigeonholed into one type of putting course for my tournaments. I like doing tournaments on all of these types of courses. So the National Putting Tour kind of captures the essence of all of these putting courses. And then some of these entities have kind of broken off, like Pop Stroke. There's another entity that has opened up called Putting World, and they're in Scottsdale, Arizona.
We'll get into that one, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Putting World is doing their things, and they build their course is more like the MSOP style. So anyway, there's a lot of these different entities out there, and National Putting Tour does tournaments on all of these courses.
Oh, I need to learn so much more, and we're going to do that when we come back right after this. Now, I didn't mean to interrupt you when you were starting to explain it, because I do want to hear more about Putting World in Scottsdale, Arizona. Tell me about this place. This seems to be a new business model.
It is. And so I had mentioned earlier in the last segment about how the MSOP has spawned these other entities. There's a guy by the name of Tim. I forget his last name, but his name is Tim. He's the head pro at Putting World. He got the idea to start Putting World from the major series of putting. He had played in their event in 2017, fell in love with the putting course, got with some high-level investors as well as Ping. Ping owns a piece of Putting World, and they started this place in Scottsdale, Arizona called Putting World. Putting World is an indoor 18-hole putting course. It's all synthetic. It does look kind of like a regular golf course, but there's no sand traps or water hazards. And the holes are more standard, and they're more like regular putts. Like Pop Stroke has like a bunch of crazy stuff going on with hills and sand traps and water hazards. Putting World are just standard putts of all different shapes and sizes. It's indoor, and they also have a bar, a restaurant, a pro shop where you can purchase, items, t-shirts, hats, etc. Another thing that Putting World has done, which a lot of your listeners may be interested in, they have a full instructional facility inside Putting World.
Wow.
So they have pros that are in there that can fit you, and it's very reminiscent of like what the guys are doing now with TrackMan, where they're tracking these different data points. And they have these really high-end booths where you can go in, schedule a session where you're working with a certified instructor. They run you through a number of these tests where they have these interactive sort of games or exercises where they can read all these different statistics with cameras and high-tech equipment. They can read what you're doing with your putting and fit the perfect putter for your putting style, as well as give you some tips on what you can do to be a better putter. So I know a lot of your listeners are interested in instruction. You can go to puttingworld.com Or if you're in Scottsdale, just drive down to Putting World. Or if you're in the Phoenix area, drive over to Scottsdale, go down to Putting World, and get a super high-end assessment on what you're doing wrong with the putter, and possibly purchase a new putter or find some adjustments to your putter that will help your putting game.
What kind of footprint does Putting World have? I mean, is it like an old Costco? Is it a giant warehouse? Is it a storefront on a strip mall? What kind of space?
I think you're sort of on the right track there. It's think of like, let's just say you were to go to like your local Ross down at like in a shopping center, like, not as big as Costco, but the size of maybe like a Ross or something like that. A Staples, like, they're using the same building that like a Staples would use, or an Office Depot,
which and it's closing down anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those locations might become Putting World locations in the future, but yeah, they're using office space of that size and building these 18-hole putting courses inside these office spaces. It's quite big. I don't know the square footage, but it's quite big. And then, like I said, they got a bar, a restaurant. They do all kinds of competitions. They have just started an entity called, here's another acronym for you, the World Putting Tour, WPT. And they just threw their first event. I actually just played in their first event. I finished 13th out of 52 guys, which wasn't so bad.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And they're giving away massive amounts of prize money. $30,000. This last one was a purse of $30,000. It's $300 to enter, with a $200 yearly membership fee. So the price to enter isn't too bad. And the first place prize was $10,000, and it was won by a guy by the name of Kevin Lucas, who's a local mini tour, club pro hotshot, and he won this $10,000 purse. So what Putting World is doing is very exciting. Now, another little side note on Putting World, which goes into a little bit of their vision, the Putting World entity are going to be opening up locations nationwide. Now, the cool thing about this is the course is going to stay exactly the same in every location. The tee boxes are done with this laser technology where they can move the tee box anywhere they want, which gives them an infinite amount of different courses that they can do. And the cool thing is that the course is the same at every location, which means that they can throw nationwide tournaments using the same tee boxes. And instead of you having to fly to Houston, Miami, LA, New York, you can just go to your local Putting World, which they're talking about 10 locations in the next few years. And you can play in tournaments against everyone nationwide. And you don't have to fly to these other venues to do nationwide putting contests, which is really cool, because one of the biggest things that holds back competitive putting contests nationwide are travel costs.
Sure.
It's very expensive to fly and get plane ticket or get hotel fare at these different cities. So you can just go to your local Putting World, play in these huge nationwide putting competitions for big money, and you don't got to travel everywhere, which is going to save the putters a lot of money. So that's one of the exciting things about Putting World.
Yeah, well, the first thing when you're starting to say, oh, but every course is exactly the same, it's like, well, that's very unlike golf, because the beauty of golf is you can go anywhere and it's going to be unique unto itself. But if now, with having locations that are exactly the same all over the country, starting in the United States, you can compete remotely and you're competing apples to apples. That's brilliant.
It is. And I think your comment there, competing remotely, that was very well said.
Thank you.
That is one of their main concepts. And so they're taking off. They had a really good turnout for their first event. They're trying to grow their tour, and the Putting World entity it's a very exciting thing. Yeah.
Very exciting. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And congratulations on finishing 13th.
Yeah.
Cool.
Along with running the National Putting Tour, I also compete in these events. I compete in my own events, and then I also compete with for events on these other tours. That's one of the reasons why I throw these tournaments, is so that there are tournaments for me to play in. That's where that's basically where it started. Because when the Major Series of Putting went out of business, especially for West Coast putters, there were no tournaments for anyone to play. Right. The U.S. Pro Mini Golf Association, which I talked about earlier, they do all their stuff on the East Coast, mainly in South Carolina and some of these East Coast states. There is another entity called the PPA, the Professional Putters Association, and they do tournaments mainly on like what I was talking about with the putt-putt courses, some mini golf courses. There's also another entity called the AMA, the American Mini Golf Alliance, but none of those entities do tournaments on the West Coast. So I started the National Putting Tour so that there would be tournaments on the West Coast for people to play in. So I know your listeners are probably, their heads probably about ready to explode with all these acronyms. There's a lot of different entities out there throwing putting tournaments. But in this last year, PopStroke, Putting World, National Putting Tour, we've all kind of experienced an uptick, and there's been a lot more excitement for competitive putting.
Well, I want everyone to make sure that they go to check the show notes, because we'll have links to all these places in today's blog post and in the show notes for this episode. And we're going to take another time out right now. So all these various putting tours that are really starting to take off here, are you competing against amateurs? Are these professional golfers? Are these PGA Tour pros? Are these PGA teaching pros? Who are we competing against?
That's a great question. So it's different for every tour, okay? With my tour, which once again, National Putting Tour, you can check us out at nationalputtingtour.com. I try to include everyone. I have a beginner division that's free at most of my events. It's free. There is a $5 labor fee that we charge just to help pay for materials and employees to help work the event, but the beginner division is free. So with the National Putting Tour, I'm trying to cater towards everyone, okay? In my beginner division, we oftentimes will have women and kids and maybe seniors that aren't the greatest putters in the world. They want to come out, have some fun. I'll give the beginner champion a $20 prize just to give it some excitement. So I have a beginner division. I also have an amateur division that at most of the events that I do is just $20 plus the $5 fee. The amateur division usually consists of players in the 7 to 25 handicap range. Okay. Then on the National Putting Tour, I also do a pro division, which it consists of mostly scratch golfers, mini tour players, club pro guys, instructors, or people that just think they're good at putting, right? So that's how the National Putting Tour works. One of the bigger tours in the nation, which is the PopStroke Tour Series, PopStroke is catering more towards the professional putter. I think it's because they have limited space, meaning when they throw these events, they don't close the PopStroke location down. So they don't have room for tournaments of hundreds and hundreds of people. They have gone with more of a model of the professional putters. So PopStroke really caters towards the professional putter, the high level putter, and they've kind of gone that direction, and they don't have an amateur or beginner flight. Putting World, which is the entity that...
Well, let me ask you, do you think that they're going in that direction to get TV exposure? Because, we're not going to want to watch beginners and amateurs putt, but watching pros compete on a putting competition would be pretty compelling TV.
So, Fred, you're a very insightful guy, and once again, you've asked a great question. Not only are they catering towards it, they've already done it. So last year, they had their PopStroke Tour Championship, and it was in Sarasota, Florida, and I played in it. It was a lot of fun. They did a TV show that aired on the Bally Sports Network nationwide, as well as the Golf Channel. It aired twice on the Golf Channel in late last year and early this year. So they are already doing a TV show. And yes, I think because of the TV show thing, they kind of went with more of a pro putter type situation.
Sure. And what was the reaction or the numbers as far as the views for that? And I'm sure it ended up on YouTube as well.
Yes, you can look up on YouTube. The TV show isn't on YouTube, but they did some recap videos that you can check out on
Okay.
YouTube. I also do videos on YouTube, and I did some videos for that PopStroke Tour series. So if you YouTube search PopStroke Tour Championship, you're going to see the videos that I've done. You're going to see the videos that PopStroke has done. They did have a TV show that aired on the Bally Sports Network and the Golf Channel. So they're catering more towards that, and they do have more television shows planned for the future. How the ratings were or what the ratings were, I really couldn't tell you. I'm not on the back end, and I'm not privy to that type of information. But I know that they do have plans to do more television show stuff. So I'm assuming that it went okay, but I don't know how well it did.
Yeah. Well, it must be doing okay if all of a sudden there's a lot of interest. I mean, if you've got these different entities showing up, you've got businesses growing around it, and it's kind of obvious that there would be this kind of attraction because not everybody is a good golfer, but there could be some really good putters out there.
One thing that they did to try to enhance the television experience, they had what they called the tailor-made $25,000 showdown. What that was is the winner of the team event. It was won by two guys, Jacob Stass and Chris Johnson, who are considered two of the best competitive putters in the world, faced off against Ricky Fowler and Paula Creamer in a $25,000 winner-take-all match in which Jacob Stass and Chris Johnson won. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, it was a little bit unfair because they threw Ricky and Paula out there with hardly any practice. And these guys that Jacob Stass and Chris Johnson that won, they had days to practice on this course. So it was a little bit unfair along those lines, but it did put things into perspective. A lot of people wonder, how good are these top competitive putters compared to the PGA pros?
Sure.
And it kind of proved that, yes, these top competitive putters are as good, if not better, than the top PGA pros. Now, don't get me wrong. If Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas dedicated themselves to competitive putting, they probably would be at the top of the leaderboard, right? But these competitive putting, it's a unique thing. And you have to get used to the format, the feeling of it, how the tournament works. There's been a lot of mini tour guys and low-level pros come in and try to shark these events, thinking that, I'm on the Korn Ferry Tour, I'm on the Hooters Tour, I'm on the Outlaw Tour. I should be able to come in and just destroy these guys that, frankly, most of them are older gentlemen with pot bellies that don't look like they're in shape. Because one thing interesting about competitive putting is that the guys that are really good have been doing it for 50 plus years. Like, for instance, there's a guy by the name of Gary Hester who just finished second in the last PopStroke event and who just won the first World Putting League event, which we'll get into in a second. Gary Hester has been doing competitive putting for 50 plus years. His teammate, Rainey Statham, who is an absolute legend, who a lot of people know, Rainey Statham has been doing competitive putting for 50 years. So these young sharks, I call them, that are good at mini tour golf and professional golf, they come in and they can't beat these guys. Wow. So it's kind of interesting.
It's really interesting. Now, are the outdoor events, and I got the sense that Putting World, the Scottsdale and the franchise that's going to be growing, that's all indoors, but everything else is outdoors?
Yes. Everything else is outdoors besides Putting World.
Okay.
Other than there are the U.S. Pro Mini Golf and the American Mini Golf Alliance and also O Street Mini Golf up in New York. They do events at mini golf courses that are indoors. But other than that, most of the stuff is outdoors. Yeah.
And are the outdoor courses grass or are they turf as well? Because maintenance-wise, I would think that you'd want to have turf the whole place everywhere.
So they're almost all synthetic. However, there are some outdoor putting courses that exist. There's a very popular outdoor putting course at Indian Wells Country Club in Palm Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never done a tournament there, but they do their own tournaments and they do nighttime stuff with laser light shows and stuff. Also at the JW Marriott in Palm Springs, there's an outdoor putting course. So there are that's real grass. So there are real grass outdoor putting courses. There's also a putting tournament called the Georgia State Putting Championship put on by the GSGA, the Georgia State Golf Association, and they do. There's a putting course at a place called Bobby Jones Golf Course in North Atlanta. That's this big, huge, real, super undulated putting green that they do these putting tournaments at. So real golf putting courses do exist that are outdoors, but most of the high level tour stuff are done on synthetic putting courses.
Amazing. All right, one more break, and this time we're going to figure out what's going to be happening this week with Golf Smarter Mulligans. This week on Golf Smarter Mulligans is number 7 of 9 in our annual Tony Manzoni series to help you launch this new golf season. Now, in this episode, we go in depth with Tony about his and actually others' fascination and passion for Ben Hogan's golf swing.
One thing Venturi told me when I worked with him, and it was really true, is that you can make that little lateral slide towards the target as far as you want. There is a point where your body will turn automatically. It's just that when you make the lateral slide and stop is when you hit that coil to the right. But if you make that little bump move where you transfer your weight and just keep going, you will just rotate like crazy. So it's a wonderful feeling because it's a powerful feeling. Where we get into trouble is when we have weight on the right foot as we're hitting the golf ball. Then you can't turn to the left. You just can't do it. And that's where you get lower back problems when you don't get over to the left side before your rotation. You have to get on that left side. That's why setting up 60-40, you're closer to the pivot point because we're pivoting around the left leg. The left leg is the axis for the right-handed player.
That's Golf Smarter Mulligans, episode 206, the 7th of 9, featuring our friend and mentor, Tony Manzoni. This is the only episode with Tony that was recorded on video on one of the first experimental online video chat platforms available to record that didn't survive, called Blab. You can watch it on the blog post for this episode. Check the show notes to learn how to get Tony's book, The Lost Fundamental, One Simple Move, Better Golf Forever, and gain access to his video of the same name. Please subscribe for free to both of our golf podcasts. Golf Smarter is published every Tuesday since 2005, and our sister podcast that revisits the best of the Golf Smarter podcast called Golf Smarter Mulligans, being released every Friday from wherever you're listening right now. You mentioned that this has gotten much more popular since COVID, as golf has gotten much more popular since everyone was locked down and needed to get out. I got to believe that the influence of TopGolf is involved in the interest in putting opportunities like this.
I think so, and especially with PopStroke. Now, I am not good friends with Greg Bartoli, who started PopStroke. Tiger now owns a significant piece of that. I don't know where he got the idea from it for PopStroke. But when you go to a PopStroke, it's really hard not to notice that it does have a feeling of TopGolf. Uh-huh. I actually call PopStroke kind of a poor man's version of TopGolf in that it's just smaller. It's basically just like TopGolf, but with a putting course instead of a driving range. So I think that the emergence of TopGolf, the popularity of TopGolf, I think it definitely made people realize, oh, like there's a market for this, and it's more than just your avid golfer. For instance, if you've been to any TopGolf, you're going to see guys, men and women on date nights. You'll see a family of people there that, the whole family's getting involved. So TopGolf has brought a lot of different types of golfers into the fray. And I think that did play a role with the emergence of PopStroke and maybe a little bit with Putting World, that they saw this model of TopGolf working. And they realize, hey, people are looking for something to do that's not, in front of a computer. And yes, I think TopGolf definitely had a major influence on PopStroke and Putting World and some of these entities. Yeah.
So when you're thinking about television and you're thinking about competition, I've got to believe, even though some of these events are offering large money, large prizes, significant financial prizes, that there's got to be a way for the average public to get involved financially as well. As we're seeing in all sports, they're like, yeah, gambling's okay. Let's bring it in. There's got to be some gambling going on with these events as well, right? Are they promoting that?
Well, Fred, another great question from you. And that's one of the things that's, in my opinion, very exciting. Gambling has entered the world of professional putting. Okay.
Makes total sense.
Keep in mind, I'm not like some avid gambler or anything, but if anyone's turned on the TV anytime recently, sites like DraftKings, FanDuel are just advertising heavily for this. And gambling on professional sports has become more popular and more socially accepted. Okay. It's just the world that we live in. People do like to place wagers on professional sports.
Oh, yeah.
And there's an entity that has just started. Now, I hope your listeners aren't getting fed up with all these different acronyms, because I know there's a lot of them, but I'm going to give you one more. The WPL, the World Putting League, has just started. Now, for right now, they've only done tournaments on mini golf courses. So they did their first event, I think it was about a month ago, and you can look that up on YouTube as well, World Putting League. They did an event at one of the most famous putting courses in the world. It's called Hawaiian Rumble, and it's in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and it's owned by a guy by the name of Bob Detweiler, who is the president of the U.S. Pro Mini Golf Association, and he's sort of considered the godfather of putting. And they did this tournament that was televised live on their website, which you can check them out at theworldputtingleague.com. And they have an affiliation right now with a sports betting entity called Betfred. You were able to...
I had nothing to do with it.
Oh, right, yeah.
Betfred?
You don't got a piece of that, huh, Fred? But Betfred is the sports betting website, it's a fairly popular sports betting website. They're also in talks with DraftKings, and you should see these events on DraftKings soon, where you can bet on professional putters. And I guess one of the rules, or one of the things that these governing bodies want, is a live TV broadcast, so that there's legitimacy, so people know, oh, this is happening right now. So when I make a bet on this guy, it's not some sort of scam where they're tape delaying it and they're making someone win that didn't win, to make sure that they make money on the sports bets. The World Putting League televises these live events, and they're actually doing another event on April 20th. This is the World Putting League event number 2.
Of April 20th, 2023.
April 20th, 2023. And I have just been hired to be their sideline reporter.
Awesome.
So check me out. I'm going to be working with them and making their broadcast a lot better. And I'll be doing sideline reporting stuff for them, kind of like a David Faraday, Bones Mackay kind of role, where I'm kind of the insider. And also the lead announcer is a guy that many of you may know. His name's Brian Katrick. And he is the voice of the PGA Tour on their PGA Tour live broadcast, which streams, and also Sirius XM Radio, and also streams on Peacock. Brian Katrick is a very well-known play-by-play guy in that space, and he is their play-by-play guy, and he just does a phenomenal job with it. But they do these live television broadcasts where you can bet on competitive putting. And that area is growing, and I just see that growing even more. And the cool thing about it is there's some revenue sharing going on, where some of the revenues from the sports book goes back to an entity called the Pro League Network that owns the World Putting League, which will help finance future tournaments. So one of the problems that's occurred in the competitive putting world, it's very hard for these entities to make money throwing putting contests. And what oftentimes will happen, like what happened with the major series of putting, is that they can't make enough money on it. So they go for a few years and then they go out of business because they can't profit, right? So the infusion of some gambling revenue will help make for a situation where these entities can start throwing more contests and have bigger prize money. And so, gambling has entered the professional putting world, And it's very exciting for everyone involved with competitive putting because it means that there's a better chance for more tournaments. So that's been very, very cool.
Very, very cool. You know what? I want to talk about, now that we've probably intrigued a lot of listeners and who want to know more and get involved, I have a feeling they're going to want some advice as well. But I want to take one more break and we'll come back and we'll do another segment because I want to dig into your brain and your experience as a competitive putter on what we should be thinking about, what we should be working on, and the mindset that it takes to be a competitive putter. And we're going to do that right after this. All right. So you've already mentioned that you've had not only sideline experience, but you've had inside the ropes. You've been competing in putting competitions for a while and have had some success. This is not just putting for a round of golf. This is a different kind of mindset. This is a different kind of putting. Where do you advise we start? What should we be working on, start to finish here, to become a competitive putter, a successful competitive putter?
Well, if you're in the San Diego area, I'm also a golf instructor. I have a website called findtheswing.com, and you can book a putting lesson with me if you're interested. I'm only in the San Diego area for the instruction stuff, but you can check that out at findtheswing.com. I had mentioned earlier that Putting World has their instructional situation there. So if you're in the Phoenix area, head over to Putting World. They have some great instructors that will help you to become a better putter. In regard to becoming a better putter, one of the things that I've always found so fascinating, and the full golf swing's like this a little bit, but one of the things that I've found so fascinating with putting is there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. Even if you look at the tour players, especially with their full golf swings, they're not all alike. And yes, there's components that you want to stay solid with, but everybody has kind of a different way of doing it. Okay, so putting is very similar. When I look at all the top competitive putters, they all have kind of a different way of doing it. Some people have like an open stance, and some people have their toes pointed at the target. Some people are using a mallet putter. Some people use a blade putter. Some people have like the 2-ball putters, So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, okay? Some things that will help your listeners become better putters that I think are constant for everyone. And I know this one tip probably sounds like real simple, but it's very important. You want to make sure to keep your head down through the stroke, okay? No matter what kind of putting stroke you're doing, a lot of people have a tendency to want to see where the ball is going, and they lift their head out last second, which will either pull the putter face closed or leave the putter face open, and they're missing putts, and they're wondering why. If you watch almost every single PGA pro, watch them after the ball leaves the putter face. That head and those eyes stay down for an extra second while the ball is maybe rolled already 4 or 5 feet. That head has stayed down, okay? So that, in my opinion, is like one of the most important things, okay? Another thing that I feel is very important, and I know this probably sounds like just basic stuff, but a lot of people are really bad with it. You want to make sure the ball hits on the center of the putter face, okay? A lot of people are towing the putter where the ball's hitting on the outside of the face or the ball's hitting on the inside of the face, and they don't even realize it. And I remember Golf Magazine did a study years ago, and they studied the point at which the ball hits on the putter face for different levels of golfer. And there was a direct correlation between the center of the club putter face and the person's score. So if the person was a scratch golfer, all their dots were like right in the center of the club face. If they were a 25 handicap, their dots were more of they encompassed more of a wider area on the putter. And so a lot of people don't realize it, but they're not even hitting the ball on the center of the putter face. So I think, just some basic tips. Those two, I think, are really important. One last one that I'll give your listeners. You want to make sure that the putter is either going straight back or straight forward or a little bit to the inside when you take it back, okay? A lot of putters make the mistake and they don't even realize that they're doing it, but they're taking the putter too when they take the putter away, when they hit a putt, they're taking it away too steep, and the putter is going outside the putting line as opposed to being right up the putting line on the way back or a little bit to the inside. And so I think those three things for your standard golfer, if you can focus on those three things, undoubtedly you will become a better putter.
I found that, and I know this tip about keeping your head still and keeping it down and not lifting it. I definitely know that, and I try to remind myself every time I'm standing over the ball. But I also find that when I do that, I tend to go long. I tend to be a little bit strong. I need to learn how to bring that back a bit.
Well, when you start keeping your head down, there definitely is a recalibration that takes place.
Yeah.
Because you're actually doing it right now. And when you're doing something and when you're doing something right, the ball will actually go a little bit farther. Okay. A fourth tip for your listeners that is, in my opinion, maybe the most important, but it's not something I'll tell people until maybe like the second or third lesson. How far you take the putter back is how far the ball is going to go. The way gravity works and just the way centrifugal force works, if you take the putter back, let's say a few inches, the ball can only go maybe a few feet. If you take the putter back a foot, 2 feet, whatever it is, the ball will go far as how far you take the putter back, or how far you take the putter back affects how far the ball will go. So if you're going too long, my guess is you're probably taking the putter too far back on your takeaway. I notice a lot of beginners, they'll have a 3-foot putt and they take the putter back on their takeaway like a 1.5 feet. And then they're always running it long and they're wondering, well, why am I running it long? A 3-foot putt, you should be taking the putter back no more than maybe like 4 to 7 inches. Okay. So I think that tip right there will help you not to run the ball too long. Go out on your practice putting green at your local golf course and start experimenting and take the putter back a certain distance and try different distances and just see how far the ball will go. And you'll find a direct correlation. And that's something that really helps people to understand that concept. And it works the same with the full swing. A lot of the PGA pros are using what's called the clock system, where they take their left arm back a certain distance, and then that affects how far the ball is going to go. Like I saw an interview with Dustin Johnson, and he was saying that when he has a 55-yard shot, he just takes sand wedge and takes it back to about 9 o'clock and takes it down and brings it down, and that goes 55 yards. So that clock system, which that's in Tiger's book as well, that clock system, it works with putting too. How far you take the putter back is how far the ball is going to go. And
don't decelerate.
You want to make sure that the tempo with putter right? is fairly the same. Now, most putters will accelerate a little bit on their downswing with putter, but with putter, you do want the tempo that you take the putter away and bring it back to be relatively the same. If you're speeding it up, some people will refer to that as a pop stroke, and that is something that a lot of people will do from the fringe and stuff. But if you're accelerating on the way down, the ball's going to run long. And then definitely if you're decelerating, the ball is going to come up short. So yes, Absolutely. you want to make sure not to decelerate on the way down as well.
Yeah, I've even had an instructor on that talked about this, and I've seen people where they do a short takeaway and then they really kind of accelerate with a longer. And I watch that and I think, how can you possibly get your distance right? And actually, the one guy I played with a lot who did this, he had a very short takeaway and then pushed hard on his forward swing. He always came up short. I mean, I can just say whether he's 10, 15, or 60 feet away, he's going to just come up short. I can just see he can't get his range right with that little kind of stroke. I don't know. That's just
I made a comment earlier. There's a lot of different ways to skin the cat when it comes to
there you go.
putting.
Yeah,
and there are people that have had success with doing a pop stroke, which is where you have a minimal takeaway and then you accelerate. Many of you are probably familiar with Brandt Snedeker.
Sure.
Brandt Snedeker is very famous for having more of a pop stroke, a minimal takeaway, and then an acceleration through the ball. But I can tell you this, it's not the norm, and most good putters are not pop stroking. They're not accelerating. Their tempo on the way back is pretty close to what it is on the way through.
Well, this is fascinating stuff. I'm really glad that we were connected, because I knew nothing about this world, and apparently not many do, because it's the emerging world of putting competition. But I also really appreciate the tips that you've provided. This has been great, Brock. And again, to the listener right now, make sure you go to the show notes, because we're going to link all these different websites and acronyms that Brock has been talking about.
Thank you, Fred. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on here.
Well, this past weekend was the 2023 Masters, where PGA Tour and LIV Golf players competed head-to-head for the first time since the LIV Tour began. And it really did come down to the last few holes before Brooks Koepka finally succumbed to the greatness that is Jon Rahm. But that's the only comment I have about the competition. I actually have two observations about Phil Mickelson's incredible final round surge that shot him up the leaderboard to finish tied for second with fellow LIV golfer Koepka. My first observation was that he must be making so much money from LIV. Did you notice that he didn't have any sponsor logos on his body? Have you ever seen that? The logo that Phil displayed on his hat and shirt were from his 4-person LIV golf team he heads up, called the High Flyers. Bad name. Terrible logo. The other thing I found fascinating was that with 9 holes left to play after Phil finished, as the clubhouse leader, was that the network, or was it the Masters Committee, chose not to interview him live on TV. Do you ever remember seeing that before? I mean, they were even doing interviews with players during the round, which was fantastic, but not talking to someone as popular as Phil, who impacted the results, had his best Masters finish in 8 years, and at 52 being the oldest player ever to finish in the top 5 at that event? It was quite a snub. Love to hear their reasoning. I want to give a shout out to Phil Singer of Bowling Green, Kentucky, for opening today's episode. As our newest Golf Smarter ambassador, Phil chose to try out the X1 balls with the Golf Smarter logo from Odin Golf, the brand that sponsors and pays everyday golfers. Now, these tour quality balls are a fraction of the price that you'll usually pay, and when you use the code Golf Smarter at checkout, you'll receive an additional 20% off the order. Their link is in today's show notes. And when you open our episode, you get your choice of a great gift, and all you have to do is leave a voicemail on our toll-free Golf Smarter listener line to get that gift. In addition to the Odin balls, you can choose to receive a private link to Tony Manzoni's video, The Lost Fundamental, or a glove and glove storage compartment from redroostergolf.com. So please send an email and I'll write back to you with some instructions of what to do and what to say. Send it to golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com. I have been posting more short content, video content from the podcast on social media, so make sure you follow @GolfSmarter on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Or, of course, follow Fred Green, that's Greene. That E at the end is very important, as a content creator from Novato, California on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for upcoming episodes, please click on the Hey Fred button when you visit golfsmarter.com.